Right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember Mail. Councilmember Qureshi. Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Great, welcome, everyone. This evening, there are no changes to our agenda. Looking forward, there are only 4 council meetings for this city council after this evening. Next week, on October 11th, we will have a voting item on resolution providing for committee appointments and reappointments. We have 3 work sessions next week. One is an overview of city financial and reserve policies. Another is a discussion of the concept plan for Tacoma Junction redevelopment. And the 3rd work session next week is a discussion of the council position on the proposed additional Northern Bridge crossing that was brought to our attention by resident Seth Grimes and a number of other folks who signed a petition and asked us to take that up. So we'll have a work session on that next week. Then we go to Wednesday, October 18th. Our voting session that night will include a first reading ordinance appointing judges for the 2017 city election, first reading ordinance amending the Safe Grow Act to add neonicotinoids to the list of restricted cosmetic lawn pesticides, a resolution expressing the sense of council regarding the Tacoma Junction redevelopment concept plan, a resolution expressing the council's position regarding the proposed additional Northern Bridge crossing. Our work sessions that evening will be a discussion of the FY 2018 Budget Amendment Number 2 and a presentation of the Draft Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. On Wednesday, October 25th, we have a voting session that includes a second reading ordinance appointing judges for the 2017 city election, the second reading ordinance amending the Safe Grow Act, and the first reading ordinance approving the FY 2018 Budget Amendment Number 2. The work sessions on October 25th include discussion of legislative priorities, a discussion of proposed amendment to City Charter, Section 702, council not to interfere with appointments or removals, and a work session on a continued discussion of draft housing and economic development strategic plan. And then the final meeting of this council will be on Wednesday, November 1st. We'll have a voting session, a resolution providing for the appointments to the Tacoma Park Youth Council, and the second reading ordinance approving the FY 2018 Budget Amendment Number 2. And then we have city elections on Tuesday, November 7th. All right. Tonight we have 4 voting items. I'll first take public comments on that. The first voting item is the second reading ordinance authorizing execution of a payment in lieu of taxes for the Parkview Towers 7667 Maple Avenue. Any public comments on that? No? All right. Our second voting item is a second reading ordinance authorizing execution of a payment in lieu of taxes agreement for Cambridge Apartments, 676 Houston Avenue. Any comments on that? The next item is a single reading ordinance of authorizing a payment in lieu of taxes for Winslow House on 666 Houston Avenue. Any public comments on that? All right, our final voting item is a single reading ordinance approving contract for purchase of office furniture. Any public comments on that? All right, those are our voting items. I will now open it up for general public comments. If you have a comment, please come to the podium, state your name, and you have 3 minutes. And Mr. Lovelace, we're getting you the microphone right now. Okay. Go ahead, Mr.
Hello, this is Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate. I want to ask you people one question. The first is, do you know when the I can't remember what I was going to say. Also, do you hear about what happened in Las Vegas last Sunday? I'd like to give my condolences to the families of the 60 people who were killed and the 500 or so odd people that have been badly injured and sent to the hospital because of guns. I'd like to know if the city could outlaw that bump stocks, to convert semi-automatic weapons into machine guns, because that's why he took so many lives in such a short period of time. It sounded like a machine gun going off in warfare. And I'd like to see if we can make those bump stocks illegal, because we don't need a weapon that can fire 600 or 800 rounds a minute. There's absolutely no need for that. That the only purpose for that is mass murder. And I'd like to know if we could put it on our agenda to make it illegal to possess a device like that or anyone similar to it. And because that defeats the whole purpose of making machine guns illegal. It just defeats the purpose. And also, I'd like to know if I'd like to also know we had a good demonstration last Saturday on the racism, and I'd like to invite people to come down to any other demonstrations we may have. So if you can do that, and also when is the can't remember it. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Lovelace. Any other public comments?
Hi, I'm Laura Barclay with the Old Tacoma Business Association. I'm here for a few items. The first one, I'd like to encourage you to swiftly pass the legislation to allow for permitting of restaurants to serve alcohol on sidewalks. Our businesses are at a disadvantage with other businesses in the county and in the district. Our businesses are turning away customers now who find out they can't have a glass of wine with their dinner. We love sidewalk seating. It activates the block. It's great for a community, and this works against that. So we encourage you to swiftly pass the permitting process to allow for alcohol. I'd also like to thank city staff for their support this weekend at Sunday's Tacoma Park Street Festival. It was truly a great day. We didn't have any official counting mechanism, but I think the consensus was from everybody involved, it had to be the biggest one we've had. And so I wanted to thank the support of the police, Public Works, the city television, and the recreation department for helping us pull off such a great event. And I also wanted to thank the mayor for joining me today. We were actually host to a group of 15 women entrepreneurs from around the world through a program through the State Department. We were selected as an organization, a grassroots organization that provides support to small businesses. So we had a great conversation with these women talking about branding and marketing, promotion, our revolving loan funds, our Tacoma Notes programs, and other advocacy that we do for our businesses here that they could bring back to their communities. So it was a great time showcasing Tacoma Park, and it was fun to have Kate join us too. So thank you.
Thanks. Great.
How you doing? I'm Chris Brown, one of the co-owners of Tacoma Bevco. And Laura already touched on this, but I think it's important to vote on the legislation for having the ability to drink outside of the businesses as quickly as possible. I didn't hear it come on the agenda through November 1st, which is a little unnerving because that's kind of getting into the season of when people aren't really going to want to go outside, and it'll be kind of pushed off until the spring. But a couple of things on that. First of all, we've already looked into what needs to be done for the DLC to make sure that we're meeting all the needs of the DLC, and so we're able to do that on the sidewalks outside of Tacoma Beverage Company. We'll put up a 3-foot fence that will kind of guard the area that there will be drinking, and then we'll also have full service. So there'll be if someone orders a glass of wine, it'll be delivered by one of our bartenders to make sure that the person that ordered the drink is receiving the drink. And as Laura mentioned, it also just kind of stimulates the businesses on Main Street and brings that kind of vibe that Silver Spring has, and places like Bethesda. There's a restaurant in Bethesda that has a very similar setup where they have a sidewalk in between the restaurant and the outdoor seating, and they serve alcohol there. They have a little chain link, and just a great vibe. It's a great opportunity to kind of build the people walking, the foot traffic, and the vibrancy of Main Street there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm Byron Levy. We have a family-owned restaurant also in Tacoma Park, and Kinda Thai and Sushi. and I wanted to. Laura and Chris stole all my points, but basically, we're also in support of being able to serve alcohol on the streets, on the sidewalks outside, as we do every day have to turn away customers that want to drink outside, or else they have to go inside and not enjoy the atmosphere outside. And so we're very much in support of a fast resolution on that, and I'll let their points stand, but we're very much in support as well.
Thank you.
Good evening, Larry Silverman, Birch Avenue. I'm the owner of S&A Beads, for many years a Tacoma Park business, now a Washington, D.C. business, but just down the street at 235 Carroll Avenue. I want, first of all, to use my 3 minutes to report that we will be open after 4 months of struggle, starting Friday, and will be open consistently. Secondly, I'd like to say I have not lost my interest, you'll be sorry to hear, in the interest of small businesses in Tacoma Park. I will continue to advocate for them. So many of our customers and so much of the character of the city is shaped by the small businesses, people who live in Tacoma Park. They should not be oppressed by unfair taxes. Third, I wanted to say that after 4 months of dealing with the District of Columbia, I have come to the conclusion, tentative, that Tacoma Park may not be the worst jurisdiction for small businesses. I also want to thank members of the council who have been very supportive of me, Mr. Qureshi, Mr. Schultz, the mayor, Peter, all of you really. I particularly want to single out Mr. Schultz because I learned just a week or two ago that he is on the board of our financial institution, Economic Development Corporation, in Arlington, ECDC. Actually, in our family, we call it the Ethiopians because this is a small economic development corporation that funds many immigrant enterprises, taxi cabs and restaurants, and they have a strong Ethiopian bent, and they are very easy and helpful to deal with from a small business point of view. When I say easy to deal with, I don't mean they're lax. In fact, they force you to go through a lot of exercises that, as a small business person, you don't always want to do, but are kind of good for you, like oatmeal.
Thank you for saying that. I'll comment it on later.
Thank you. I was here once where the nuclear free zone people were talking about how we ought to change banks because the banks that the city uses have some dealings with nuclear energy issues. And I have no objection to that, but I wonder if there might be some other criteria. Maybe when you decide to invest your money with a bank, wouldn't it be a good idea to say, how many small business loans have you made in this community? How many people have you helped to buy homes? How welcoming are you to small businesses in this community? I think I would hope that in everything you do, you ask yourself, why is small business good for our city? And what can the city do to enhance that goodness? Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience all these years.
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening?
Good evening, Mayor Stewart, members of the council, city manager, city clerk, and deputy city manager. I come tonight to comment on the presentation that was made last week. I was unable to attend by Neighborhood Development Corporation about proposals to build in the city-owned lot in the Junction. And I prepared an 8-slide slideshow. I was just informed that the system is not working in terms of displaying it for the public, but the technician told me that he could, with your permission, send it directly to you, and I can follow along on my iPhone, and at least I can get the information to you that way tonight with your permission.
If it's within the 3 minutes, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, but you have 2 minutes left, so.
Fine. So just let me know when that comes up on your screens.
Mhm. And I think you should know that I believe Councilmember Mail is on the phone, so I'm not sure he'll be
Okay.
able to see it.
Okay.
And we're not seeing it.
Oops.
I emailed it to you, but it's also not as
As Mr. Sherman gets his presentation together, is there anyone else who would like to give public comment this evening? Did you have something else to say, Mr. Lovelace? Can you just wait 1 minute? We're trying to do the presentation, and then we'll get you a mic.
Can I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Julie Taddeo, Ward 2, Safe Girl, Montgomery. I just wanted to speak about the issue you'll be talking about tonight, the adding neonics to the registry for the Safe Girl law. Just a couple of things I think we need to keep in mind. First of all, I think it's a wonderful idea to include neonics, and we could be marketing our city as a bee city like Asheville, North Carolina. We do so much more than Asheville, and they're getting all the glory. So we need to catch up to that. The thing about the Safe Girl registry is that it applies to lawns, not gardens, and neonics are typically applied to gardens to ward off a lot of insects. So if there's a way to actually apply the law for neonics also to gardens as well as lawns, I think it would make more sense. And the other thing to keep in mind, I know there was some concern expressed about the appeal that's going to take place regarding the county law. Both the city and the county law have an education mandate and the public property law, and those will be untouched by whatever happens with the next ruling at the appellate court. So I think if we could find a way to also protect the neonic provision, that would make this law, sort of distinct, and that way we could stay a bee city. So that's my only concern. By adding to the registry, the whole thing could go down, but by maybe tweaking it, you could actually preserve and make the law distinct from the county law. Thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Lovelace.
Okay, what I was trying to announce before I got tongue-tied was we're going to be celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. We're not celebrating Columbus Day anymore. So what is Tacoma Park doing to celebrate it? We're going to have a rally of some kind or a march for Indigenous rights. I hope we do something along that line to get people aware of it and let everybody know about it. Not just in Tacoma Park, but let everybody around know about it so we can make it really meaningful. Another thing is it's 34 days before we vote. 34 days. Time is going by fast. So you 16 and 17-year-olds out there, this means you. You've got to get out there and vote, and you've got to get registered. And also the adults who have already known better. I want them out there voting too. And also everybody's asking me, is it going to be down at the community center, the local elections, or are we doing it the same way we did before at the middle school and other places? Thanks for letting me share. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Mr. Sherman, are you ready now?
I am, thank you. Oh, it shows here as well. That's great. So there have been several iterations of the proposal to create a lay-by in the Tacoma Junction, and this is the first one that I became aware of.
Just to let you know, I'm not sure it's going to work tonight, but we don't. It's not shown on.
You're not getting it on your.
Yeah. All right.
Are you getting it, Madam Mayor?
No, I'll start the timer again and I'll move.
Oh.
Go ahead. Just go ahead. We'll move.
Okay. I'm sorry. Originally, the first diagram that I saw put the lay-by behind the sidewalk on Ethan Allen Avenue. And you can see that here where trucks would pull in behind the sidewalk and then again cross through the sidewalk and back out onto the street. So that was the first strategy that I became aware of. Next slide, please. Next slide. Can you go to the next? So this is the second proposal that I became aware of, in which the sidewalk is behind the lay-by, and that was came out this spring, I believe. You can go to the next slide. I thought this would work easier. Anyhow, so this is from the slideshow last week, and this is what caught my eye, because this moves the lay-by to the east, almost up to the boundary of the co-op property line. And if you look in the middle of that photo very, very closely, you'll see in faint gray lines the image of an 18-wheeler truck. And what concerned me about this photo is that of the 4 sidewalks in the junction, the new sidewalk from the tip of Grant directly across Ethan Allen is missing. It's just not portrayed at all. And that's either an oversight or it's because the lay-by has been moved to where that crosswalk ends up. Next slide, please. So this is where the crosswalk ends up, and that's where the truck would be, is right there where the crosswalk hits the sidewalk. And you've also got on the right, you've got a traffic signal box, then you've got the traffic signal pole, and then you've got a power box, and then you've got a utility pole. Next slide, please. And again, same picture of all the various pieces of infrastructure here that would just make it impossible to put the lay-by in this new location closer to the co-op. So the other photos just show more of that type. In essence, I do not understand why the proposal presented to you last week omits the new crosswalk. Today happens to be, in fact, go to the next slide if you can, in the few seconds I have left, happens to be National Walk Your Child to School Day. And if you can see on the very right-hand side of that corner a school crossing sign. Why would we get rid of that crosswalk, which so many people worked for so many years to create? I don't understand. Thank you so
Mr.
much.
Chairman. Any other comments this evening?
I guess I'm the rebuttal witness. I'm Howard Cohn, Jefferson Avenue. My wife and I moved here in 1982. One of the first meetings we attended was at the firehouse, and I remember Carl Idding standing up and saying, "Here's an amazing fact. Tacoma Park is almost 100 years old, and you would think that the layout of the town has all been figured out, but no. We're sitting at the Tacoma Junction, which is the geographic middle of the town and a very, very logical place for a town center, and yet there is nothing here." And he said, actually worse than nothing, this has been a town dump. So Carl soon after was elected to the council, but had very little success in making anything happen at the junction. And 35 years have come and gone, and over that time, there have been a few successes, notably the arrival of, the bringing of the co-op by the council to the junction. And we also have now Spring Mill, Mad Fitness, Historic Tacoma, but no one would say this is a town center. So I congratulate you and thank you that you are on the cusp of making it a town center, and I encourage you to push it over the finish line. Obviously, there's devil in the details, but most of the details I liked, what I heard last week. The height seems proportionate to the firehouse. I think the lay-by is a good compromise. The overhang is creative, and more details are to come, of course. But to go back to the idea of a town center, and I'm sure we can have many iterations of what that might mean. But to me, the junction is within walking distance of maybe a third of the town, including people who live in the apartments on Lee Avenue and Maple Avenue. And right now, there is frankly no good reason for them to walk up to the junction. So I would imagine in the future a restaurant, a coffee house, some establishment that draws people from Lee Avenue, Maple Avenue, Jefferson Avenue, Woodland, Sycamore, and all of us would be hanging out there in a natural way. That would be a true success. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening? No, we'll now move on to council.
Mayor, can I just
You want to
interrupt?
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that a number of people had either sent me texts or whatever There was a lot of white smoke coming out of the mechanics bay at Public Works. It was not a fire. It's been cleaned up. It was some problems with the hydraulic compressor. The fire trucks and the police officers are leaving the scene. They'll come back and check it. But I know that there was a lot of excitement, but I think everything's just fine.
Okay, thank you for that update. Good. All right, now council comments. Do we have any council comments this evening? Councilmember Schultz?
Two things. Well, maybe three. No, I'll leave it to two. I'll let you talk about the mayor's lunch. About a week or so ago, a gentleman by the name of Gus Schumacher died. He had a nice write-up in the Washington Post. And I knew Gus Schumacher. He was in his mid-70s. But the obituary, as fine as it was, completely neglected to mention anything about his role in Tacoma Park. And this was a gentleman who was quite instrumental in the creation of the Crossroads Farmers Market. And he and the late John Hyde helped that market. Now, I guess this is starting its 11th year. Got it started, helped get it organized, and it's now in its 11th year, and coming. I'm trying to pull up something here. Christy Balch, the executive director of the Crossroads, acknowledges that John Hyde and I believe Gus together got the market and the Fresh Checks program up and running. Gus was instrumental in getting the waiver from the USDA that allowed the Fresh Checks program to operate. And Gus constantly linked us to other people and organizations and supporters that allowed us to persist and grow. It's safe to say that Crossroads would not exist today if it weren't for Gus Schumacher. And understand that his doing this for Fresh Checks, this was the first time in the United States that the USDA had ever done this. It's now replicated in farmers markets from one coast to the other. So our Crossroads market is famous. But I just wanted to say that, tell the story about Gus Schumacher, who worked for the USDA and did all kinds of things, which I'm not going to talk about. But he also wrote a history of the Crossroads Farmers Market and its beginnings. So I wanted to acknowledge his passing because he's a key person in this whole area of getting fresh foods into the parts of the community that are desperate for it. And that's what had made the Crossroads Market 10 or 11 years ago truly unique. The other thing I wanted to comment was to respond to Mr. Silverman in regard to his reference to the ECDC. The ECDC stands for the Ethiopian Community Development Council. It's based in Arlington, Virginia. In 1991, which is a long time ago now, when I was working for Arlington County, Virginia, in the Economic Development Office, they came to me and asked me to help them draft a grant to the Office of Refugee Resettlement to start a microloan program available to immigrants and asylees. And I helped them write that, and it got started. And now, after all these years, it's still going strong. I've served in a leadership position from that time until the present, and still do. They're the largest micro lender in this part of the United States, and they do I guess between $1 million and $1.5 million each year in microloans, which surpasses the sum total of all the lending done by any of the other microloan programs in the region. And we've tried to facilitate this program in the Langley Park area and as well as in Crossroads. Mr. Silverman's business was one of those among several in Tacoma Park that got loans through this program, which makes microloans up to $50,000 and has for all these years. And it's been one of the joys of my life to be able to be affiliated with that program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. I reported periodically on progress or activities relating to the proposed new math science building in North Tacoma on the campus of Montgomery College, and I just wanted to mention the latest step along the path on that. So as people will recall, my colleagues know, we had gotten to the point where there were two potential locations, two sites for the new math science building in North Tacoma, both along Fenton Avenue, one right up close to the Nunley Student Center, which is the newer building right where you get from Tacoma Park into Silver Spring. And then the second one further along Fenton back toward the residential area. So both along Fenton, one closer to the residential section, one closer to other parts of the campus. And for myself and Mayor Stewart, we had sent a letter not that long back indicating that we favored the site that was closer to the rest of the campus as opposed to near the residential area, which is also incidentally closer to Bell Ziegler Park, previously known as Jakey Park. And a number of other local community organizations and residents had favored that position as well. So on Friday, the president, Dr. Pollard, sent out a letter. It was a lengthy letter, 9-page letter. There's a lot to go through, indicating that it's a little bit of a mixed letter in that she indicated she wants to go forward with the site closer to the residential area, but she will go forward with the other one if additional funds are available to speed up the construction process. And I actually think that would be a good result because in addition to ensuring that the new facilities for math and science are made available earlier for the students, and everybody here I think has agreed that they do need to be modernized, it would also mean that the construction period would be shorter than it otherwise would have been, which would have been a concern for residents. So what is up in the air at this point is whether additional funding is available, and we've started making some inquiries about that. So we still don't know for sure where it's going to be. My hope is that one way or the other we'll know before the end of the year. Obviously, this is not just a simple 3-sentence update, and I apologize for the complexity. That's where we are, and we'll report more as we continue forward. And I think that one other question would be, I don't know whether we've already done this, but if the letter could be posted on the page.
Yes,
okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. Councilmember Smith.
This Monday, I had the opportunity to be a guest on the Real Feels show. It is a political talk show hosted by Philip Malcolm. For some of you that may remember Philip, he is the former student body president of Washington Adventist University. The show talks about local politics, and we had the opportunity to discuss the best ways to get young people involved. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. People who watched the council meeting last week know that my wife and I were asking for volunteers to help us to serve food at the Ward 8 Farmers Market in the District of Columbia in Anacostia. I just wanted to thank those people who did call me and volunteer. We had a very successful day there. We had a lot of fun. It was interesting to hear Councilmember Schultz talk this morning or this evening about the fresh checks, because that was the way that farmers market functions. I would say all of the people who visited that market and shopped there were very low income. Many and most of them had fresh checks that helped them to purchase food. It's a food desert down there. This is near the dairy farms you may have heard about previously in the news. It's a very needy area, and it was it's very good that Mike Tabor, a local Tacoma Park resident who has a farm and sells produce, has included that market as part of his distribution system. So anyways, thank you for those who volunteered. The 4 of us who went down there had a good time. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Qureshi?
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple things, and then for the city manager, Sligo Overlook Playground is a really weird construction project because some days they're there working feverishly, and then other days there's nobody there. So if I can get more of an update as to where we are on that and what we anticipate to be the completion date, if we can maybe cut a ribbon before the winter hits, I think that would be great. There's been a lot of chatter on the community listservs about this really minor issue called Tacoma Junction. And I say minor jokingly, of course. But I also see a lot of misinformation. And there's now been, and I'll reserve the balance of my comments on these issues for the next 2 meetings because that's when we'll be discussing it. But for those community members who actually watch these meetings, I would urge you to look back at council meetings on this topic, look back at the timeline in the project center and the city website, explaining the process, explaining the levels of community input, also explaining what the steps are moving forward. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of folks advocating for various positions. So I would just urge people to educate themselves rather than spreading misinformation because there's a lot of that, and I'll address that more directly. A couple things that I want to talk about that hit close to home. You think about when you're retiring from council about what you want to talk about, and 2 things come to my mind. My friends always ask me, Rizzy, you ever pop off at council meetings? I was like, no, I don't pop off, but I'm about to pop off. A couple weeks ago, we had a very in-depth conversation about bikes on sidewalks. It's sad to say this, but when I was away out of the country last Friday, a friend of mine from college was killed in Austin, Texas, riding a bike last Friday. Based on initial reports, he was new to Texas, new to Austin as an MBA student, had been traveling throughout Asia, came out of a private driveway from a sidewalk, and just turned the wrong way on a street, going in a one-way street in the opposite direction, and hit a minivan head-on. And, you know, it's tragic to hear like a 33-year-old person getting killed like that, who had so much promise in his life and who grew up with a very specific perspective, which was narrow-minded by his own admission, but then traveled the world with the Peace Corps throughout Asia, learned Chinese, and developed a new appreciation for the diversity of the world. And, you know, you could see him evolve as a young person. But it reminded me of some comments made by community members about this council being very direct about, well, if somebody dies, it's on you. I only bring this up because every single person up here takes that into consideration. We take the safety of the community into consideration in every decision we make. We look at data. We ask for various community committees that we've created to provide us guidance on these issues. And sometimes, yes, as some of us were blamed for doing, well, you're passing judgment on bikers when most of you don't even bike to work. Yeah, that's true. But I pass judgment as an elected official on a lot of communities that I don't necessarily belong to. I protect the interests of a co-op that I can't afford to buy or shop in. I protect the interests of keeping property taxes down when I don't own property in Tacoma Park. And many people up here included a racial equity impact in every resolution that we pass. Many of people up here aren't even brown or black. So we look out for constituencies, but when we look at the data, we make a decision that's based on the data and what is in the best interest of the city as a whole, not based on the best interest of one or two individuals who may come before council. So I just wanted to raise that because it's been bothering me ever since I found out about my friend Justin, and also just because I think people pop off from that podium and we don't ever get to respond. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was something that Mr. Lovelace brought up. And I think about, me and Councilmember Smith being the lucky men up here who are the men of color. And thanks to the mayor and Councilmember Smith's leadership, we have a racial equity impact section in each of our agenda items. But I think it's the deeper issues there is to talk about white privilege a little bit. We have this tragedy that occurred in Las Vegas, and it's really worth mentioning for a number of reasons. One, to me as a Muslim American, when the news was coming down, my first wish was, I hope it's not a Muslim. We already have an administration that's actively engaged in doing everything to marginalize Muslims in this country, even well-intentioned ones who want to serve their country and serve at the Department of Justice, like myself, or in the military. But white privilege is so clear in media coverage and discussions throughout communities about this issue. When you think about the coverage of this horrible man who did this, overwhelmingly is, how could he do this? He's a rich man. How could he do this? He plays $100 a hand of poker at the casinos. How could he do this? He's a multimillionaire. He has no axe to grind. He's not an extremist. But buried in all of this, which came out very early because I get law enforcement alerts, was ISIS all the way over in Syria, of course, in their propaganda, decided to take credit for it and said, oh, he's one of our soldiers. Nobody ran with that. And everybody said, well, it's just ISIS propagandizing because that's what ISIS does. Now I ask you, if the person who did this was named Rizwan Qureshi, and he was a Muslim, and he happened to be inside of that hotel room, and ISIS decided to take credit for it, would we jump to a conclusion and say, no, that's just ISIS propagandizing because the Rizzi we know would never do something like that? And an example is how you compare to the last year's tragedy with the Pulse nightclub issue. You have this guy, Omar Mateen, who varying accounts suggest was exactly what they're describing this white man as a lone wolf who had some mental health issues, who may have said some crazy things on a call with mediators with the police department about attacking on behalf of ISIS, but for all intents and purposes was a troubled man. But the media narrative continued to be, this is Muslims, and today we are litigating at the highest levels of our country a Muslim ban. So, I think about these things and think, this is something that goes on the record forever. I don't know. I hope there's going to be a lot of different people up here, and it looks like there's going to be a lot of women. So we're going to have a difference in perspective, but I think this needs to be codified in this progressive community's history, that we need to be cognizant of our white privilege, of privilege of any kind, whether it be racially based, economically based, socially based. And like we've done with this council, with the racial equity impact, we should focus our attention on these types of issues because they permeate. These might be national issues, but they permeate throughout our community. And as minority of a city we are, we have our own issues racially in the city. The city is very divided, and we need to be cognizant of that. Just because we're left-leaning liberal Democrats mostly doesn't mean we don't have our own problems regarding privilege. And the last thing I will say about that, to bring it home to Tacoma Park, another tragedy, Newton, Connecticut, at Sandy Hook. It would happen in a city not much bigger than ours, about 10 or 15,000 bigger than our city, but a small city. And we talked about the budget this past few months, and we talked about a SWAT team, a CRT team. These types of tragedies, which have become more and more common to me, only further note I know that we are going to continue to push back on the increased militarization, whatever we want to call, of the police department, which is a problem in how you interact with well-intentioned community members. But I think these types of tragedy only further note for me that our police department needs to have the best equipment and needs to be prepared for any tragedy like this if it were ever to present itself in this community. And I think the CRT team or the SWAT team is something, if we're going to have a police department, they need to be here. And it just further confirms how important our police and our first responders are, and they deserve a lot of credit. So I'm done popping off. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Mail, would you like to say anything this evening?
No, I just wanted to apologize for not being there in person. I'm able to see the meeting online and hear you guys all well. So thank you for letting me join by phone.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll just make a few announcements tonight. Thank you to Councilmember Qureshi for mentioning Las Vegas and bringing that up. I just want to note that we were in our council meeting tonight, that the Tacoma Park Mobilization did hold a vigil, as well as Moms Demand Action, to raise awareness on gun safety issues and the tragedy in Las Vegas. And Laura Barkley was here earlier, and she thanked City TV, the Police Department, Public Works, Recreation, and all the staff that helped out with the street festival this year. And I just want to thank Laura and everyone at OTBA and Main Street Tacoma for a great festival. Also, the police department sent around a video of the Community Policing Academy last week, and I want to encourage people to take a look at that. This is a police academy for residents who live in the city. Last year it met on Wednesday nights, and I think it was about a 10-hour program or something like that. I can't remember all the details. But the police department, it's about a 6-minute video. The police department will be announcing the next academy, I think, sometime in January, so be on the lookout for that. From everyone I know who attended it, they said it was an amazing experience. On October 13th, Friday the 13th, join Councilmember Smith and I at Tijuana Mexican Cafe at 949 University Boulevard for one of our lunches. So,
Councilmember Smith or Schultz?
Schultz. Did I say Smith?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You'll be there, right?
All right. You'll be there. You can come too. Sorry. I was looking at Councilmember Schultz and I said Smith. Councilmember Schultz.
We all tend to look alike.
I know. It's the hair. All right. I think that's it for me tonight. I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you. Following up to last council's meeting, Councilmember Schultz expressed concern about the increase in loiterers at East-West Highway and New Hampshire Avenue. Certainly the police department's officers have been aware that that's been a problem and that they are monitoring it very closely. If any of the residents or business owners see that going on, feel uncomfortable, they should call the non-emergency number 301-270-1100 or 911 if they feel that it's an urgent matter. Councilmember Qureshi shared a concern about rats. Didn't put in the notice that it was gray rats, but anyway, any kind of rats are a problem. And near the corner of Beach and Sycamore Avenues, our neighborhood services team staff did visit the site. They didn't see any rats. They looked for that, for evidence that they didn't see it. We'll still be monitoring it. There was a lot of compost and kind of vegetable garden debris that can be attractive to rats. So we recognize that's an issue, but at the time he went, he didn't see it. Certainly, if that keeps up, please let us know also. We have lots of stuff coming up about Tacoma Junction. It's been mentioned a couple times. We're going to have a special Tacoma Radio Community Forum on Tacoma Junction this Sunday at 4 o'clock. And Mayor Stewart, Councilmember Qureshi, Ward 3 candidate Casey Kostick, and myself will be on the air. Eric Bond will host that. People can call in. They can send tweets or emails with questions. And I think we'll answer questions as they come about our process. As was mentioned before, our website has a lot of really good information about the junction, a lot of background information on the process, and we will be getting up some more information tomorrow with an expanded question and answer list that I think residents will find helpful. There were reports this past week of muddy water in Sligo Creek at Maple Avenue, and it seems to be related to a water main break. We put out a variety of community alerts so people could understand what was going on. We really do appreciate when people see things if they report it, because then we're able to track down, is there a water main break or is there an illegal discharge that needs to be addressed? So people can call the Public Works Department or they can call the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Programs. And we have contact information. Sometimes you can just call the police department, especially if it's at night. We will send the folks out to check up on it. We have still lots of positions open with the City of Tacoma Park, and we have our staff working very hard to go through the review of candidates and applications. We do have the police chief position open. We have licensing specialist, a limited term position of economic development specialist. We have dispatcher, parking enforcement officer, crossing guard, sanitation driver, sanitation tech, right-of-way tech, and a variety of recreation specialists, program leaders, and program assistants. City of Tacoma Park is a great place to work. We want the community, especially residents, to work here if we can. We would love to see the applications. People need to go to the webpage, click on careers, and then there's the application process through that. The other thing I just want to mention is the Tacoma Park newsletter is out. There's an inside brochure poll out on the elections. Please pay attention. Please vote. And there was a question about where people vote. They vote in this building. And so just please pay attention to this when it comes into your mailbox. Thank you.
Great, terrific. All right, now we'll move on to our voting session. The first item is a second reading ordinance authorizing execution of a payment in lieu of taxes, an agreement for Parkview Towers, 7667 Maple. Councilmember Siemens, do I have a second? Second. Councilmember Qureshi, any discussion or questions on this one? All right, would the clerk like to call the roll?
Councilmember Mayo.
Aye.
Councilmember Qureshi.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Aye. All right. Next is a second reading ordinance authorizing execution of payment in lieu of taxes agreement for Cambridge Apartments. Would someone like to move this?
So moved.
Councilmember Smith, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Siemens, any discussion or questions? The clerk will call the roll, or the vote, sorry.
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Mayo.
No.
That was no.
No, yeah, so
Thank
That
no.
was a no.
Councilmember Qureshi.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Next is a second reading ordinance authorizing a payment in lieu of taxes agreement for Winslow House. Do I have someone to move that?
So moved.
Councilmember Smith, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Siemens. Sorry. Any discussion?
I would just like to say that after exchanging emails with Mr. Spencer, that I am supporting the pilots for both of the properties owned by Victory Housing and look forward to continuing our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Mayo.
No.
Councilmember Qureshi.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Next, we have a single reading ordinance approving contract for purchase of office furniture. Someone like to move this?
I'll move it.
Councilmember Schultz, second.
Second.
Councilmember Qureshi, any comments or questions on this?
Can you just give us a quick overview just for the
Okay.
record?
Nope, I have to turn you on.
Flash, there we go.
Yeah.
The current year budget includes funding for the purchase of needed workstations, reception desk, et cetera, in the HCD area of this building. Their space is in dire need of updating, and this was something that was agreed to as we went through the budget process, that this work would be done. The quotes for the different systems were provided by the Hun company under an existing national agreement. And so we are going to be purchasing, if you approve, the lower cost Accelerate system. It's a cooperative purchase made in it's a cooperative purchase, so competitive bids are not required. The total cost of this, including design costs, is $51,400. So it will update and make a good working environment for the HCD staff, which they desperately need. I urge you to approve it.
What are you going to do with the old stuff?
You know, we will get rid of it, but it's not very good. Happy to, if somebody wants it for an art project or something, maybe we can help you out.
I don't want it, but I just figured we could reuse it, give it to some organization in the community.
It's very strange. It's like half built in wooden stuff, so it's not easily moved or reused.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Mail.
Aye.
Councilmember Qureshi.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay, now we will move on to our work session. The first is discussion of permitting restaurants to serve alcohol on the public right-of-way at sidewalks.
I can open this up.
Okay.
As we heard tonight from comments to the council, there's interest in having, in restaurants, being able to have sidewalk cafes that also serve alcoholic beverages. Sidewalk cafes would be, kind of by definition, in the public right-of-way. And so that means that it's within the city's control. Right now, we do not have real provisions even for sidewalk cafes. We kind of have some places where folks have put out tables, and we've categorized it a little bit under sidewalk sales, which is not the best match and best definition of what goes on. There are some cafes that have some outdoor seating on property that's part of theirs. It looks like the sidewalk, but it's really their land. So sometimes people think that we're in control of that, and we're not. In any event, as a city, we do need to get that kind of straightened out because it is something that's lively. A lot of people do like to have sidewalk cafes. It does add enliven the streetscape, and it helps businesses. So in any event, I think that's something that we would want to kind of clean up as something that we have. As part of that, if we allowed sidewalk cafes kind of on a regular basis, there would be a design element to that to ensure that people can walk past safely. It meets ADA standards. It does not cause some other disruption for people getting out of parked cars and those kinds of things. So I think, we're a tight community, so it's a little bit of a challenge for some locations, but it's something that we would have provisions for. The more perhaps difficult question is should alcoholic beverages be allowed to be sold and to people sitting in those sidewalk cafes on public right-of-way. And we have very restrictive rules in the city code about serving alcohol. Very few places, there's very few opportunities on city property to have alcohol sales. There are some that are related to some events in this building that do have to go through quite a process to be approved. We've had a couple single-time events that we've managed somehow to have discussions with council and allow, such as the truck garden event and some little fair kinds of things. But we really don't have standard provisions for that. And as some of the speakers alluded to, a lot of this needs to be written out in a very careful way so that they can get permits from Montgomery County Department of Liquor Control to be able to sell alcoholic beverages in the controlled environment that DLC requires. And so if there was a desire to allow alcoholic beverages to be sold in these sidewalk cafes kind of settings, we would need to amend our administrative procedures for how we use rights of way to allow that, and some code language as well. Then there's just I think it would be useful to improve the language around these single kinds of events, because again, we don't have really very clear criteria or provisions for those, and if alcohol is to be sold at those, it makes sense if we're attacking this, we attack it all at once and have it so that it worked together to provide both a good environment for the community, but also meet all of the alcoholic beverage restrictions and safety provisions that we would all want and that the county requires. So we have quite a lot of information in the agenda package, but it really comes down to, I think, the council giving us some direction about what our staff spends some staff time on. The first would be perhaps a straw vote or some direction on should we have some provisions for having outdoor food sales in the sidewalk cafe kind of arrangement. So that would be one. The second would be, if you did do that, would you also want and allow alcohol to be provided or eligible, I guess, available in those settings? And then third, for events on public spaces, such as in the back parking lot here, the city's lot until it's developed, or that kind of place, allow consumption of beer or wine. So I think there's three questions for you. In any of these, we would need to go through and prepare the right code language or administrative regulation language to have it go forward. There's pretty good models that the county already has, so it's not starting from scratch. And we would want to, where it was appropriate, mimic the county so people aren't having to learn a number of different kinds of rules. But I think that lays out what we're looking at here, and it's really a discussion for the council about is this something that you want the city staff to prepare information on and bring back to you for action?
Great. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Since I've been on the council, which is admittedly a long time, I've seen the city move from a nearly dry city to one where we have allowed alcoholic beverages to be served in a number of locations, as the city manager just talked about. During that time, I've opposed those expansions of the sale of alcohol, each time expressing concern about the effect that it can have on the community and that it does have on the community. NIH says that there's nearly 7% of the population that has an alcohol use disorder. And my concern isn't just that people are affected by alcohol, but that we as a council, as a city, have not done anything to try to address the needs of that population. I know the police have for a long time been frustrated that when they find someone who is inebriated, passed out on the street, they don't have good alternatives on where to take that person. They may take them to the hospital, but they can only hold them for a short period of time, and the next night, if it's the same person, they take them back again. But the hospital is not equipped to handle a lot of people. Anyways, I, again, am opposed to broadening the sale locations where alcohol can be sold without the council and the city doing something to address the problems that just naturally fall in behind these sales. And I would caution my colleagues that when we say, oh, this is, we're talking about a little table up in Old Tacoma, that we're also talking about tables in front of or beside businesses in other parts of town, parts where you may not want, may not feel as comfortable to see people drinking. And then lastly, I would say that as we talk about special events, that we pay particular interest to the racial equity because I think there could be a tendency to draft regulations that are biased, and I think we have to be careful not to do that. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith?
A couple questions for the city manager. Well, let me first say that in general, I do support the proposal and think that city staff should do some more research in how we can mimic what the county is already doing, especially if we're going to go forward with the Tacoma Junction project. I think a lot of the restaurants and even coffee shop vendors will want this type of outdoor seating. But I also want to acknowledge and recognize Councilmember Seaman's comments. They're extremely important. Alcoholism is a big deal in our nation, and I don't think we pay enough attention to it because alcohol is legal. Does the city ever make any contribution to not research, but treatment of alcohol abuse, or have we done that in the past? Or an education program or something?
We haven't done very much. We certainly do when it's part of, especially when we're working with young people about, how to be responsible adults as they're growing up. So there's that. There are some nonprofits that use our facilities that help promote that or deal with people who are dealing with alcoholism or other kind of alcohol-related problems in their lives. I think the entity, as Councilmember Siemens mentioned, that deals with it the most is the police department. Right. And so it's what do you do when there's a domestic disturbance? What happens when people are just loud out on the street and it drives the neighbors crazy? Or what do you do when someone's passed out and you can as you said, you can take them to the hospital, and there's kind of some drying out processes that the county has put into place, but it's not. It's a very short-term solution to a particular person, and it doesn't really address this as an issue. I don't know that I would like to get into the business of that. It's in that it's more social service, and we try to use the county to address it. But that hasn't stopped us in many other areas of the work that we do. And as I first mentioned, I think a lot of it is teaching people how to be responsible.
And can you talk to the county and see if they have a program of education or what?
Yeah. They actually have some pretty good programs,
okay.
And they tend to go. They put most of their emphasis, frankly, with the providers of alcohol, so restaurants, bars, beer sales, and liquor stores, and they actually have some excellent programs. I don't know, and I will find out if they have some that are targeted to users.
Right.
And I don't know what they have for that.
But where would we fit in the mix if we're giving these permits to like the parking lot? Because we're not the user, but we own.
Whenever anybody does these, they still have to get county permits from DLC. Right. So even if it's city permission to have something happen on our property, they have to get our permission to get the DLC's permission, and we don't allow it to take place until all of the okays are done.
Right, but since it's not an ongoing business, would that group still get the same type of education that like a restaurant would, or a cafe, or?
They don't get the full thing. They are supposed to go through those who actually pour the alcohol are supposed to go through that same training to recognize when somebody's had too much. Restaurants that have more ongoing service have certainly have more ongoing training.
Okay, I just, want to make sure if we go down this route that we do recognize that it is a problem for people. And, if we change our regulations, we're going to have more and more beer festivals, or, people are going to want to have activities where they can serve beer or wine. So I just think we should be careful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilman Kovar?
Thank you. I appreciate the good explanation of what we're talking about here. This is something, the idea of serving, and in particular serving alcoholic beverages in an appropriate setting on the sidewalk, that's been raised by several businesses in the area that I represent. 2 came forward tonight. Others have also asked me about it. I would say I'm generally supportive of the concept. I think there are some areas where I think we need to be careful. I think some you mentioned, which is pedestrian safety, and including for those who are disabled. So particularly if you have a situation where the servers are going from the establishment across the sidewalk to tables closer to the street, that raises some additional questions beyond those where it's up against the building. And so I think there are plenty of places in this area where that exists, but I think we just need to make sure that we are confident that that can be done safely. My sense is that it can be. And obviously the second one, and that's very important, is to ensure that there's no service to minors inappropriately, because in some way it's outdoors away from where the establishment is, and it sounds as if having the waiters, you couldn't just bring out a glass of an alcoholic beverage, but you'd have to have the waiter serve you. Another thing I'm concerned about is, and I think Councilmember Smith referred to this also, is whether there's noise and disturbances connected to this. And one of the things I wanted to ask, and maybe we don't have the answer now, but under what the county does or what other jurisdictions around here do, can there be hour restrictions separate from whatever the regular hours are, so that, in other words, if you had a bar that was, I don't know, just to pick a number, that was open till 1 in the morning, but could you say the outside serving, if it's on a sidewalk, couldn't go past 10 o'clock or something like that?
I think absolutely. If it's our property, I think we can, provide the criteria that we think is appropriate.
Okay. And certainly one of the things that I have heard from a number of constituents is concerned about noise in the area where the residential and the commercial areas sort of meet in the Old Town area. I'm curious, also following up on what Councilmember Siemens and Smith said, could we get statistics on police activity relating to responding to public drunkenness
I'm
and
sure we
things
can
of
get
that
some.
sort?
We can look into
Right.
what we've got.
I don't remember that really being part of the statistical presentations that the police have made in the past, but I assume that probably exists. And one other point, just in response to what Councilmember Siemens mentioned, it sounds like what we're talking about is for establishments that already have liquor licenses, then potentially allowing them to do this. So I take your point that it's not something to do lightly, but it also doesn't sound to me like we're saying, let's expand the number of establishments that otherwise have this, as opposed to let's allow those that do to have a different way of serving. So I just mentioned that.
If I can just clarify that, there's pretty strict rules about what you need to, the way you need to be set up to qualify for certain liquor licenses, alcoholic beverage licenses, and so that would continue to be the ruling factor.
Right. So, and just last one other question, there was discussion of the county. So if we were to put in place some version of this, do we have to have that approved by the county, or is it just that there are county requirements that come into play also? And if the answer is that that's one of the things that the staff would look at.
I think we don't have to, I'm sorry, Ms. Daines? There's certainly rules about the kind of beverages and that kind of thing, but.
Yeah. If the council supports this, we would go through and work to create administrative regulations or the ordinance so that it allows us to address some of the issues that are raised in their outdoor cafe liquor license regarding distances and things like that. So we don't necessarily have to mirror what the county is proposing, but we would like them to be able to work within our rules while providing compliance with the county's legislation.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. Councilmember Schultz?
Yeah, some questions. The first question has to do with the city lot that we're asking NDC to develop. That's a city-owned parcel. We've signed a lease with NDC for 99 years, so it'll always be a city council parcel. Would the current law prohibit NDC from, or the tenants, the restaurants that they may lease to, from serving alcohol?
I don't know. I think that would be, I would want a legal opinion about that.
I think we ought to get one. I mean, let's...
I mean, I think the general assumption from how the discussions have gone is that in general the businesses would function as if it's on private property in terms of applying for licenses and all of those kinds of things. But yes, I would need to determine and have determined legally what that different role of us owning under a 99-year lease does and how it might apply here.
Okay.
In any event, I think this is a great time to find out.
Yeah, I have the same presumption. I have the same presumption you do, but it just occurred to me that it might be something we want to fix quickly if we have to. I guess, by the way, I'm fully in support of this proposed ordinance. One of the things that I'm concerned about is sort of the relative unequal treatment of the city, by the city, of businesses. And a couple examples. I mean, one, correct me if I'm wrong, Roscoe's, which has a good bit of outdoor seating because its front door is set well back from the public right-of-way.
Right.
So I presume that under current law, Roscoe's could serve alcohol outdoors because that is not public right-of-way where those chairs...
I think that's right.
Right. Yeah.
I've had a beer out there.
Ms. Staines?
The area in front of Roscoe's, their patio area, is on private property. So
so they can serve alcohol.
They can serve it with the appropriate licenses that are approved by the county.
Sure. Okay. That's what I was
Right.
thinking. So that means that because of the geography that they have, they don't have any problems.
And if I might just
Go ahead.
piggyback on that, when some of the various restaurants have come to us saying they need to have their alcohol on the right of way in front of their restaurant, we say, well, you got room in the back, you got room up top. There's other locations on your property that you could do this. It may, though, not be the places they want.
Sure.
So there is that difference between what's private and what's public.
Yeah, I mean, another example to support what you just said is Republic, which has outdoor seating, but it's in the back.
Right.
So on the other hand, we have restaurants like Kinda and Tacoma Bev, which represented themselves here earlier this evening, that currently can't do that, even though, and frankly, they would only be putting, we know that space in front of their places are small, so we're probably only talking about a handful of tables and chairs, but it would also apply to Trattoria Dolina, Mark's Kitchen in Middle East, because all of their doorways are right on the edge of the sidewalk. Not that any of them are necessarily interested in doing any outdoor service whatsoever. So I think we need to be paying attention to some sort of kind of fairness there. And my concern is not so much with alcohol service, is that I don't want to see any of these businesses not succeed because they're having to turn away, or customers are walking away when they realize that, as was said here, that they can't get have a beer out on the sidewalk. I mean, that's unfortunate, and I think that's something needs to be remedied.
Councilmember Schultz, may I interrupt you on this
Please.
point? There's one aspect, obviously, people rent what they want to rent, and some prices are higher because they have more space in a more positive location or more space out front. So, there is a difference probably in terms of for that.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the other things, and I'll just throw it out there may be times when, if this were to go through, whether or not it's alcohol, but in terms of really defining sidewalk cafes, we may do some reorganization of the right-of-way so that there is more space on certain places, or maybe on certain days there's not any cars allowed to park, so there's a little more room for some extra tables, or so there's, I think, we're happy to try to work with the residents and the businesses and the council people to determine what might make sense in different locations.
It's been a very popular place, like in New York City, where they will close a curb lane and push out and allow patrons to sit in what is normally a traffic lane. I mean, it's amazing what can be done.
When you've had a couple drinks.
Yeah. So, Councilmember Siemens expressed some worry about the fact that this would apply, if we made this change, to businesses not just in Old Town, but of course in other parts of the city. And but my feeling is that if what's good for the goose, meaning Old Town, is going to be good for the gander. Whether many would choose to put chairs out on the sidewalk on New Hampshire Avenue in front of their restaurants, don't know. But the fact is that almost all of those are on private property anyway, because they're in shopping centers that are naturally set back. It's hard to think of any that come right to mind that are smack on public right-of-way. So we'd end up actually with a fairly narrow number of food restaurant businesses that right now are feeling this, would be helped by this, and I think we can afford to do that. And finally, with regard to the other question about the problem of alcoholism, to me, yes, we can all acknowledge that, but in a city as small as the city of Tacoma Park, when there's so much availability of alcohol from places that sell the stuff, packaged goods stores, whatever you call them, even the co-op now we allowed them the opportunity to sell alcohol in the bottles of wine on their store. We were able to give them that advantage, which apparently has been extremely lucrative according to what they've told us. I think it just makes sense to allow businesses to have this opportunity to serve beverages, and also full, as you were saying, full food service at these same spots. Thank you.
Councilmember Qureshi.
Thanks, Mayor. This is an easy one for me. I'm strongly supportive of this, and I was popping off earlier and talking about how my comments are memorialized forever, and this is probably going to be a bad one because my mom will know that I like to enjoy a beer once in a while, and I'm a Muslim, and that's not good. But I'm reminded of a young lady who's sitting in the audience right now who I met with at Tacoma Beverage, Miss Kostiak, who I think will be my replacement. And I remember I was waiting to meet with her, and I wanted to sit outside to have a beer, and I think she was going to have a coffee, and it was not possible, so I had to sit inside. And that kind of business model, I think Tacoma Bev is a perfect example of where people go at all hours of the day, and you may have one person who wants to have a cup of coffee and another person who wants to have a beer, and they can't sit outside together. So for me, the public right-of-way really directly impacts businesses like Kinda and Tacoma Beverage, and I don't think, agreeing with Councilmember Schultz, that we should be disadvantaging them. With respect to sort of public property and parking areas around the community center, I think in line with my colleagues, I think that needs to be a more specific permitting program so that we are aware of what the purpose is of why people are coming in. It's for a defined period, so if you want to rent out one of our parking lots to do a beer festival or whatever the case may be, I think it should go through city government.
I guess I'm sorry, I hadn't thought that we would not do that. I assumed we would do that, but I appreciate you bringing that up to clarify.
Yeah, and then Councilmember Siemens' point. I see his larger point, and I agree with it. But I also see what the city manager said about creating this sort of public safety or social safety issue, which often we look to the county about. But I think Councilmember Siemens cited to some anecdotal experience that he has with the police department, and their troubles of redirecting people who might have substance abuse issues. So I think it would be helpful for the council to not just get anecdotal information, but maybe get a brief report from the police department on if they encounter somebody who's under the influence of alcohol versus any other controlled substance, what is the procedure that they undertake? How rampant of a problem is that in Tacoma Park? And then in the context of this issue, maybe we can resolve an issue of marrying them up with a county-level program that, as Councilmember Smith said, to address, I think, a legitimate issue raised by Councilmember Siemens. But I will say that I strongly support this, and I agree with the gentleman from Tacoma Bev. We can do it in a streamlined way to get it done before this summer and autumn is over. We should do that.
Councilmember Mail, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. I have a few comments. Just wanted to confirm that you can hear me okay?
You're a little faint.
Okay. Is that any better?
Yes.
Great. So my comments are framed in support of both the city having a sidewalk cafe policy improved, and then also the allowance of serving alcohol in the right of way. And I guess in general, I think about sort of the absence of distinct problems in all the contexts in which we serve alcohol now. So, for example, the farmers market all summer long, and I use the word serve, I mean sell. Farmers market all summer long had both wineries and breweries that were having tastings and selling their products right there on Laurel, where we're talking about. And at that time, we weren't concerned with and haven't had policy conversations about the fear that, I might buy a bottle of Pinot Grigio and slip it to a minor behind in that context. So I think we've already got, sidewalk cafe use and not any obvious problems associated with that. We've already got alcohol sales in a number of locations, as other council members have noted. And so I'm in favor of these changes and in favor of trying to move as quickly as possible, noting the economic costs, as Councilmember Schultz did, the potential impact to businesses of missing out on sales, and for businesses often a very small amount of additional patronage, of additional purchases from customers can be the difference between survival and non-survival, or survival in the busy season in summer and fall to get through tougher months in the winter. The question that I have for city staff is concerns Gaithersburg and Rockville. The county policy that was shared in our agenda packet notes that approval from both Gaithersburg and Rockville is required as a condition of them moving further forward in the county process. And I would just ask that we could get information on what Rockville and Gaithersburg add in. So that's my first question. But let me just do them online. Let me finish my comments before getting back to that. My other comments are, I think, and the city manager said this at the opening, that as much as we can stick to a policy that is similar to the county's policy as possible, that would be the approach that I prefer. In part, noting Councilmember Kovar's comments about trying to sort of thinking through some of the details here. I guess I'm not concerned that we have to, for example, get this exactly right the first time. So I don't think we need to spend, for example, 2 years on a regulatory process to try to get to try to deal with all the issues. We could do it, and then we can review it after a period of time. We could issue permits, sort of conditional permits for 6 months, 12 months, under a policy we put in place fast. And then, with the businesses fully knowing that their permit is valid for, a year or whatever period of time the conditional approval was covering, that it may or may not, be approved in the second round or the third round. That same kind of uncertainty is available for anyone who has a liquor license, right? You have to meet certain criteria to have your liquor license renewed and be the kind of business that meets public health and other county and state rules. And just sort of associated with that comment, I guess my preference would be to try to do something very quickly that a policy that simply says for the period of the next 6 months, you can get a permit for sidewalk use or sidewalk alcohol sales if you meet county requirements. That we can just simply use the county process on a short-term basis, and that we make that kind of policy change fast. Because I'm just worried that the process of developing regulations and developing a city policy might be 12 months or 18 months away. And so I would encourage us to take a couple of actions. I would encourage us to take an action to try to get a resolution in place and an ordinance in place quickly that just adopts, if you have approval under the county system, you would be approved to have a 6-month or short-term license or approval in the city. And then the longer-term track to try to get in place the policies that Ms. Dane spoke about and the city manager spoke about. So those would be my recommendations. I guess the other thing that I would ask council to consider indicating, my colleagues to consider indicating the city manager is, as we assume, it sounds like there's support for the sidewalk cafe approach, but that we specifically say that our expectation is whatever policy is developed wouldn't change any of the uses of our sidewalks that are, of the right-of-way that are being made right now. So we don't want to, I'm not aware of any problems associated with current uses of the right-of-way for outdoor seating, for restaurants, for Tacoma Bevco and other businesses. And so I think we should make clear that the intent is that the policy that is developed by city staff not change what's currently seems to be working. So I'll leave it there and I'll go back to the question that I had about Gaithersburg and Rockville.
Okay, you were breaking up a little bit, so I'm going to recap what I think I heard. First you kind of made a statement that so far we've kind of had an absence of problems with alcohol sales in the right-of-way, such as some of the activities with the farmers market, that you're in favor of moving as quickly as possible. You have questions about kind of what are the Gaithersburg and Rockville requirements, how, look into that. You noted that we don't need to get this exactly right the first time. We could have conditional permits that would need to be renewed, or we could write it in some way such as that, and that if there were an option to try to do something very quickly, to have some agreement by the council through resolution or ordinance, that if they meet kind of the county process, that at least for now, until we would get administrative regulations written, that would work. I think that's something we as staff actually will need to look at. I don't know. But I appreciate, trying to be creative, and we'll see what we can do with that, if that's the direction of council.
Great.
And just my specific question is, do our staff know what Rockville and Gaithersburg require? Because the county policy references the necessity of Rockville and Gaithersburg approval for businesses in those jurisdictions.
Yep. Ms. Daines?
I believe, and I'll need to reconfirm this, that Gaithersburg and Rockville are called out because they have their own permitting services department. So, and a majority of the streets contained within those communities are local streets. So the permitting services involvement at the county level recognizes that there's a permitting process that they are in charge of, and that a majority of the streets outside of Gaithersburg and Rockville are county streets.
One of the things, too, that sometimes comes into play, obviously Gaithersburg and Rockville have their own zoning, so sometimes if there's some other kind of provisions that affect that. I know in looking through the county provisions, some of this stuff doesn't quite make sense for Tacoma Park, so we would have to have it written so that it does make sense for us. But I think that it doesn't look like it's overwhelming. We just need to go through that.
Yeah, it's more of an organizational or governmental structure than any specific regulations.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. I won't reiterate what my colleagues said in support of moving forward in these 3 areas as other people have recommended. And I would just say if I would put a priority, I know how busy our housing department is right now, but I would just say put a priority on the sidewalk cafe permitting and the ability to serve alcohol in the sidewalk cafes. If there's, a need to.
Well, I think at this point it's helpful to get direction. I think we're hearing direction. I think we'll need to do a little bit of assessment about what might be involved in terms of staff, and I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. Terrific. Great. All right. That's it for that work session. Now we'll move on to a discussion of amending the Safe Grow Act to add neonicotinoids to the list of restricted cosmetic lawn care pesticides. All right.
I think I'm going to let the city attorney handle
All right.
this.
You're here. We'll let you.
Okay. Well, the proposed ordinance text would add neonicotinoid containing pesticides to the city's register of restricted pesticides, which applies only to the use of pesticides for lawn care purposes. So I know there's been some discussion of prohibiting the use of those pesticides for any purpose in the city, particularly in light of recent state of Maryland legislation which restricts the use of such pesticides to only professional applicators.
Does anyone have any comments or discussion on this? We have a work session on it tonight, and then we'll be voting on it in 2 weeks.
Actually, if I can just piggyback on what the city attorney mentioned, expanding the oversight to something larger than cosmetic lawn control would mean a different role for staff, a larger learning curve for staff, some different education. I understand the interest in that, but it does have a different impact than simply adding another banned list to our current list. So I just want to let people know that it does change how things work with our staff and with education of residents if we do ban neonics for more than just ornamental lawn use. Thanks.
Okay. Great, and I just want to thank Ms. Taddeo for coming tonight and raising that issue, but I'm also just really conscious of how much time this council has and the issues we have to take up. And so we'd just like to also mention that to my colleagues that we have this in front of us. The city attorney has looked at it already. We have this on the calendar to be voted on, and after tonight, we only have 4 other meetings, which are pretty packed. And so if the idea of expanding this was something, this might be something for the new council to take up after November. So just wanted to put that out there as well. Councilmember Schultz?
Yeah, I think I concur with the mayor and also the issues that Ms. Ludlow just raised that were, and thanks to Ms. Taddeo for mentioning this, the fact that bees are most likely to be found in gardens than they are on lawns, particularly ones that are immaculately treated by pesticides so that there's absolutely no clover for the bees to study or get involved with. So I think we could add this neonicotinoid thing to the Safe Grow just as an addition to the list as it pertains to cosmetic lawn care, and leave the rest to next year's city council. And that might be a wholly different ordinance, separate from Safe Grow altogether, that would just address the threat to bees in our community.
Great. Councilmember Qureshi.
Obviously I support adding this to the list, but I'm just trying to understand what my colleagues of the city manager just raised. But if, as Ms. Taddeo suggests, I'm not an expert in this area, but if they largely apply, if it's a chemical that largely applies to gardens, if we were to make that switch now, which I understand is going to be potentially problematic, what would be the language change in the Safe Grow Act? Couldn't we make a special exception for just this chemical for gardens?
Yes, we can. We don't have to expand all of Safe Grow beyond lawn care, lawn care purposes. We could just say that neonics cannot be used for any purpose.
If it's a matter of using the word any purpose, is it really that? I get the point that you're making about, and I'd like for you to give me some background on that too, which we just talked about, which is how does that impact staff time and all that. But in terms of the actual language in the Safe Grow Act, if we say this particular chemical applies across the board versus the other ones with lawn care, it seems to me from a procedural hurdle, that's an easy fix, the language. But if you can talk a little bit more about
I think there's two issues, and I think it's less about staff workload per se, but more about community opportunity to speak to the issue, because I know that Safe Grow was a controversial topic when it was passed, and this would, I think, be something that we would fairly need to advertise widely and have hearings on. And the materials that we have prepared, the bus shelter ads that we have, refer to ornamental lawn, pesticides for ornamental lawns. They don't. So that's kind of what we have focused on, just the ornamental lawn use. And so we would need to change our materials over time. I think it's a little harder to enforce if we, with the, it would be almost impossible to enforce with the materials that we have. We would have to create new educational materials and advertising.
I mean, playing devil's advocate, because it's the last matter of the day and I'm trying to milk every council meeting that I have. I mean, it could be argued that a lot of people in the community don't know that we're even doing this right now, right?
I think, well, absolutely that's true. The one thing that they have, I think, entrusted to the city through the action so far is that bad pesticides aren't to be used on lawns. And expanding the list of what's bad, I think, is a little bit of a less of an issue than starting to talk about gardens and other kinds of things. And so, so that's, I think, just anticipating reaction, and I think fairness to what people have. We've been trying to educate people about what they can't do. That we would need to do a different kind of approach to say, okay, we're looking at something a little different.
And I would just add to that, Councilmember Qureshi, in order to let people know we were doing this, in the newsletter that is going out right now, there is a box in the newsletter talking to people about it, and it talks about the lawn issues, not expanding it to gardens. So if somebody reads the newsletter and says, oh, this is what the council is taking up. And normally if we had other meetings where we could add another work session or something, but it's going to be tight.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Kovar?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, so there is this question that I was thinking about, and Ms. Taddeo and others have talked about it, and I don't know if it falls under the category of severability. Councilmember Qureshi can maybe opine on that, but imagine if we added this language as it is, and then the ruling by the court against the county safe grow were to be upheld and applied to us on our own local safe grow law. If that happened, because if I read the background materials correctly here, it says that the state actually passed something already barring the use of neonicotinoids, except for by certified applicators. So how would that automatically void this too? I know it's hypothetical, but
right. Adding neonics to the register of restricted pesticides would not impact how this court ruling would affect our law.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Adding neonics to the register of restricted pesticides would not affect how the court ruling affects the Tacoma Park law.
Because we're trying to do something beyond what the state currently allows? Is that?
Correct. Both were the opponents of this law would say we're doing something in a field that the state regulates, and that we're prohibiting something that the state allows, which would be application of neonics by professional applicators.
So if the appeal process will run its course in some number of months potentially, is it preferable to leave our local law as it is until we see how that gets resolved and then potentially decide this? Or it's not like a yes or no answer, but
it's really that's not a legal question. It's what does the council want to spend its time doing?
And maybe for the city manager, do we have data on? You talked about the sort of relationship between educating the community about the law and so on. Do we have, I don't know if it would be statistics, but data on what we've done to educate, and if there have been enforcement cases, or if there's an estimate on what hasn't been done as a result of the law? Do we have some? I know it's hard to show what didn't happen, but
well, we certainly have contacted all of the kind of applicated companies.
Right.
And routinely, and so they know they can't do these things in Tacoma Park. If somebody violates that, we go after them, especially if it's an applicator company. For individual residents, we've tried a variety of kind of education methods. I don't know, we have not done a study about which educational methods might be the most effective. I think, for a future resident survey, we can ask, do you even know about it, and are you abiding by that? But I don't know that we've got details on that. I think I might be able to get some anecdotal things about conversations with community groups and that kind of thing. My personal belief is our biggest effort is actually the bus stops, and some of the news stories.
Has anybody been sanctioned either?
Yeah, we have cited people.
can we get those stats at some point?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably lean toward, because it seems like the way it's drafted now would only be for lawns, and it sounds like from the discussion people are saying that may not be relevant for neonicotinoids. I guess I'd lean toward holding off on that until we see what happens with the appeal, if adding it isn't really going to accomplish that much, if I'm understanding this correctly. And why add it until we have a better understanding of what's happening? But I'm still grappling.
Sorry, my thing just changed.
I'm going to stop.
Okay. Councilmember Smith?
I would say that I support adding this to the Safe Grow ordinance as soon as possible. I think that this is a great proposal. Anything we can do to protect the bees is something that we should try to put as many resources into as possible. One question that I do have is regarding, would we have to make any type of budget amendments if we do go forward and say that we're going to add this to the list so we can have more education?
We only, if the council wants to move forward for neonics to apply outside of just lawn areas,
right,
then there would be a budget impact, and I'd bring that back. It's not going to be huge, but it does mean reprinting the materials that we have and the and doing something with the with like the bus displays and stuff, which are probably the most costly element.
Okay, all right, that's what I'd support. Thank you.
I'm sorry. So you support expanding it larger than just lawns?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Councilmember Schultz.
I think we're omitting one very serious consideration here when we weigh the idea of expanding it beyond just cosmetic lawn care. And that is that we're not thinking in terms about the people who are required in our city to actually enforce this in the field. Because you're asking that person or those persons not just to observe what they see in the front yards, and understand our code enforcement personnel are not allowed to go beyond what they can see from the curb or from the lead walk. Okay? So what constitutes a garden? Well, a lot of people have their gardens in their backyards. Are we saying to them, oh, well, you can't use this in your gardens? Gardens, what's the definition of a garden? Is it a garden that's only in the area that's visible? Is only applied to the front yard? Or are we saying we're going to amend the Safe Grow ordinance and expand it to include the entire property, regardless of what's planted there? Whether it's shrubs or, whether the stuff that attracts bees or whether it's just, or what? Well, what's the point of having it apply to gardens when our staff are legally prohibited from approaching that? Actually enforcing it if it's outside the literal view of the code enforcement officer.
Well, I mean,
And
so are the backyards, the lawns in the backyards.
Yeah,
I think,
that's the problem, and a lot of people have their gardens in the backyards, and the resident's going to say, well, yeah, I'll apply. If they want to comply, they will. But if they sort of say, oh, phooey, I don't want to comply with this because I don't want to. Well, there's nobody to enforce that. So I really think that this requires a lot more thought and consideration of definitions and where it literally physically applies. What do we mean by gardens? Or are we talking about the entire residential property, front and back and all of that, and the practical implications of having our staff in the field and enforce the whole thing. And that's why I only will support adding this to the Safe Grow list as it stands now, just to the cosmetic aspects of lawns?
The city clerk has been whispering in my ear. And why don't you share what your information is? You want to put?
So there are a couple of things. The law that was passed by the General Assembly prohibits sale of neonics, except basically it limits retail sale of neonics so that the average homeowner should not be purchasing it. And even if using it in their garden, it can only be applied by a certified applicator
Right.
or someone under the supervision. So in principle, a homeowner, your typical homeowner, should not be using this regardless of what Tacoma Park does.
Right, but what we're saying is, my understanding is because we're saying like a lawn care company cannot do it. So in Tacoma Park, we're adding it to our list and saying then
That's right.
if you have a lawn care company, they cannot use neonics.
Exactly.
And that's what we wanted to do with this, was close that gap from what the state is doing and what we're doing with Safe Grow. So, you're not yet. No. Do you have a follow-up question to this, or
Well,
do you
yeah,
want?
at some point.
Okay, you can ask it now.
Well, I guess I just want to be clear, because what the city clerk had said was my understanding of this, but it sounded like people were saying, and maybe I would just like to understand the science of this better, are bees active in lawns, or are they only active elsewhere? Because this proposal is only for lawns, right?
Mayor Stewart, could I jump in?
Yes, go right ahead, Councilmember Mail.
So if you were looking at pounds of neonicotinoid poisons used across the country, most of them are used on crops. But if you ask the different question, which is, on lawns, which pesticides are used most often, the answer is neonicotinoids. So they're the most common, or one of the most common, turfgrass pesticides used in the country. And then the question about pollinators is twofold. One, if your lawn looks like my lawn, it's full of dandelions and clover. And those are used extensively by pollinators, but especially by bees and honeybees. And the second is that if you're applying a pesticide like a neonicotinoid to your lawn, the pesticide drifts into the gardens as well. So there's definitely pesticide exposure from neonics in a lawn context. As the city clerk said, the good news is that the state of Maryland has already basically taken care of the public education component for us, because people will, by and large, no longer be able to buy these pesticides on the shelf at Ace Hardware or any other hardware store, Home Depot, et cetera. You have to have a license. You have to have a specific license from the state in order to do that. So the public education piece, I think, is actually easy. It just applies to the licensed pesticide applicators that we've already dealt with the other categories of prohibited pesticides. And then the other thing that I wanted to say on this issue is that one of the reasons why it's important to take this action now is precisely because the state, with overwhelming support in both the Senate and the House, have said that neonicotinoids are clearly dangerous enough that they're prohibiting their use by all of us, right? Like all of us who don't have a license and are banned from using these by the state of Maryland. So clearly there's a reason to be concerned about these chemicals, just like there is about the other categories of chemicals that we have already restricted. So I support taking the action on the table. I haven't heard any specific amendments to the proposed language so far, other than our discussion. I'd love us to take this action quickly and make this change, and then to say that depending on the outcome of the court case, in particular, if we lose, I think we need to go back in and look at what's left of our statute and how we can do the best job possible in rights of way and on city property. So, a fallback, depending on the outcome of the appeal, is to sort of look back at public land and public rights of way. For now, I'm in favor of just making this addition number 5 and using the same definition of neonicotinoids that Maryland already uses. So they've also done the work for us in that respect. They've come up with a category of definition that we can use to implement our law.
Thank you. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. At my home, I have difficulty telling where the yard stops and the lawn stops and where the garden begins. We had some of the best squash this year that I've tasted in what I thought was our front yard. So, but anyways, I've noticed over the past several years really diminishing population of bees and wasps. But so it's really concerning. Butterflies, we just had a handful of butterflies this year, and we've always had, hundreds of them. So I think that we need to do whatever we can to try to help our little friends out. So I would be supportive of adding the neonics to our list. I am completely opposed to going further with it for the reasons that Councilmember Schultz so eloquently mentioned, that it's a lot of issues there to be dealt with, and this council only has a couple of meetings left, and I think to do the job right, we're going to need more time.
Great. Councilmember Qureshi, did you need to speak?
No, Councilmember Mill thankfully chimed in on the question that I had. Thanks, Tim.
All right, great. And I'll just add and say thank you again to Councilmember Mail, and I will add myself to the folks who would like to move forward with what we have in front of us for this council and get this change done. I'm counting, keeping tally. I have Councilmember Mail, myself, Councilmember Schultz, Councilmember Siemens, all favoring this change to move forward. So I think we'll move it forward for the first reading. All right? All right. And then we are adjourned. Don't forget to tune in. Councilmember Qureshi will be on the radio at noon on Sunday?
2, I think.
2. And then at 4 o'clock, there'll be a whole bunch of us on the radio talking about Tacoma Junction. So thank you very much. We're adjourned.
She said